I feel honored to get to preach this first Sunday of the new year, at least according to the Gregorian calendar. The liturgical nerd in me is thinking back to the first Sunday of Advent a month ago, which Rob reminded us marks the beginning of the church year. And the ecumenist in me feels the need to recognize our Orthodox Christian siblings who follow the Julian calendar and will not technically observe the new year for another 9 days on what will, for us, be January 14th. Brief historical footnote: this is due to a change proposed by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 to prevent the calendar from drifting further and further away from the natural equinoxes, hence the name Gregorian calendar. End footnote. Given this important milestone, how we as a culture observe and experience the passage of time, it is probably not surprising why I chose to title this sermon Beginnings. I have had the Chicago song with that same title running through my mind on repeat while preparing this sermon, and I was very tempted to play it as an intro, but couldn't find a good way to make the lyrics fit. I will just say that this is only the beginning. Our lives are filled with countless beginnings and inevitably endings. Beginnings cannot come to pass without the ending, or at least transformation, of what was before. As the famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus famously observed, the only constant in life is change. 2019 must end for 2020 to begin. Advent must give way to Christmas. And a new birth means dramatic changes to the lives of parents, siblings, relatives, and friends, whether those parents are a young couple in 1st century Bethlehem or a single mother in Boston in the 21st century. Change can be exciting and joy-filled, but it can also be painful or heartbreaking. Which is why the holidays or the dawn of a new calendar year can be difficult times for those who have lost loved ones or who are facing despair-inducing medical diagnoses or having to deal with seemingly insurmountable financial problems. In the midst of change and new beginnings, it bears repeating that it is okay not to be okay. And it's okay to be gentle with ourselves and with each other. Please pray with me. God, you are the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. You walk with us in all of our beginnings and our endings and everything in between. We give you thanks for this and every moment. Be in our minds and hearts as we ponder you and your word for us today. May your Christmas light shine brightly within and among us. And may it bless the meditations of our minds and hearts this morning so that they may be fruitful and acceptable in your sight. Amen. In the beginning was the Word, Enarchi en ho Logos. I have loved this passage for a long time and jumped at the chance to preach on it as this week's gospel passage in the lectionary. My love of this passage goes back to my days as a young boy singing at Grace and Holy Trinity Cathedral in Kansas City. I can't remember much about the piece, but it had a wonderful fanfare proclaiming this glorious sounding, albeit puzzling text. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The text says that we have a beginning, and the Word was there, and not just any word, mind you, but word with a capital W. And this Word was with God, but it was also God. It sounds great, but what in the world is that supposed to mean? In the beginning was the Word, but the beginning of what? Is it the beginning of time? of the universe, of everything. Yet the text tells us that at this beginning, the one the gospel writer is talking about here, that the Word was already there, and God was already there. A strange way to begin if we are talking about the beginning of everything. The text doesn't specify this, but it certainly seems a sensible conclusion to draw that God has always been, that there is no beginning for God, no time before. And I love this idea of the pre-existence of the Word, and that the Logos had a key role in creation. All things came into being through the Word, and without the Word, not one thing came into being. It's beautiful. And by no accident, I imagine, it echoes the words and images of another story of beginning contained in the Bible. The Gospel, according to John, coincidentally begins with the same words as Genesis. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. In Hebrew, the words are Bereshit bara Elohim. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the translators use exactly the same words as the Gospel according to John. Anarchi, in the beginning. This is the version most of us are likely familiar with, but other translators give us a slightly different translation. When God began to create the heavens, and the word for heavens in Hebrew, shamayim, only exists in the plural form, and the earth. Perhaps it's not the beginning of everything, just the beginning of God's activity with the physical, material universe as we know it. And then God famously says, "Let there be light." And there was light. God speaks light into existence with a word. Two words, actually, in Hebrew. Yahi or. There's beautifully subtle poetry here that can easily get lost in translation. Don't get me wrong, I love the way Genesis reads in English. But the Hebrew hints at more, which for me inspires an even deeper sense of awe and wonder. This seems very appropriate for this time in the Christian calendar, when we are reminded of another great and awesome mystery, that of the Incarnation, of the Word made flesh, as our gospel passage refers to it. Yahi, let there be, comes from the three-letter stem, Yod, He, Yod, or Y-H-Y, Yahi. You may be thinking that it sounds very similar to another word that we see frequently in the Hebrew Bible, nearly 7,000 times. This word is comprised of 4 letters rather than 3, Yod, He, Vav, He, or Y-H-W-H. What we Christians often read in English as Yahweh or Jehovah. Rabbi Arthur Green, who is the rector of the rabbinical school at Hebrew College where I work, provides a definition and explanation of this 4-letter name that I absolutely love in his vocabulary of Jewish spiritual life. He writes, in fact, the Hebrew word for being is Hawaya, a simple switching around of the letters in YHWH, or Yahweh. The Yod or Y at the beginning of the divine name makes it look like God's name is in the imperfect tense in Hebrew, meaning that which is or that which will be, present and future. This makes sense if we think of Moses and the burning bush when God tells Moses, "I am who I am," or I will be what I will be. The text shows us that both meanings are possible. God says, "This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am, or I will be, has sent me to you." This biblical footnote points to deeper meaning in these simple words. Rabbi Green writes that a more likely or accurate understanding of the Tetragrammaton, or the four-letter divine name, is an awkward conflation of all tenses, and that it is better to translate God's name as is, was, will be, altogether. YHWH is not really a noun at all, but a verb caught in motion, artificially frozen by the limits of our human finite language. Movement conceived as though it were a thing, he writes. A photograph attempting to capture something that can only be understood in motion. I can't think of a better way to describe the human experience of attempting to worship, love, or understand God. The vastness of everything, what was, is, and is yet to come, squished together in an unruly mishmash that seems nonsensical and refuses to play by any human-created rules of how things are supposed to work. Yet, what seems to not make sense, in fact, has deeper, more complex meaning contained in its roots and history. There is an elegant, awesome beauty there, one that transcends time and space, if we are willing to take the time to look deeper. And, appropriately, we cannot arrive at this deeper appreciation on our own. We can only earn such wisdom by sharing, by listening, by being in touch with our present through our past, and by being in relationship, in dialogue with those in our own tribe and the tribes of those who are different from us, who see the world through a different lens or from a different vantage point. I know that I talk about this a lot, but this makes me think of what I feel is an important sacred practice. What the former dean of Harvard Divinity School, the late Krister Stendahl, called holy envy. Amy Jill Levine and Mark Zibby Brettler state it so well in their editorial preface of the Jewish annotated New Testament. No religion contains all wisdom expressed perfectly. We can learn so much about ourselves, our faith, and the divine by listening to the wisdom and experiences of those who are different from us. This again makes me think of the Incarnation, the impossible blending of human fleshiness and divine awesomeness. Similar to the divine name that attempts to capture or distill for our benefit the wild boundarylessness of God. Once again, God defies all the rules to join God's self with creation, to redeem what we humans have continually muddled up, to put it mildly, for thousands of years. In Jesus, the Word, capital W, hologos. In Jesus, God provides us with an example of true love and shows what is really possible if we are capable of responding to God's call, of taking the time to look deeper and listen to the wisdom collected over millennia and understand that God was, is, and will be, no matter what we do to each other, and no matter who is trying to claim a monopoly on truth. Everything that has ever existed or will exist came into being through the divine word. According to Genesis, that is God speaking creation into being with a word. According to John, creation comes through a Greek metaphysical understanding of the logos, the reason at the heart of everything that governs existence. Life comes through the Word and God, who are co-eternally and mysteriously united together. Trinitarian doctrine says that the Holy Spirit is wrapped up in there too. The word for spirit in Hebrew, ruach, is the same as breath or wind. one cannot speak words without breath. So perhaps the third member of the Trinity is getting her due in apropos ways that are equally mysterious as they are easily overlooked. Life comes through God and the Word and breath or spirit. And that life, as we heard, is equated with life. That life is equated with light. The light of all people. Not just some, not just the wealthy, or the poor, or the progressive, or the conservative, or the powerful, but everyone. The writer of John gifts us with this image of a light shining in the darkness. Perhaps it is a small flame flickering tenuously in the midst of an endless sea of darkness. Perhaps it is a lighthouse beacon circling in a rhythmic pattern, ready to guide anyone who would see it into a safe harbor. Maybe it is a roaring campfire, hoping to be well tended so that it won't consume whatever forest may surround it in the darkness, because someone didn't take the time or did not know how to tend it properly. What is the darkness that is being spoken of here? I don't know, but the text tells us that the darkness does not overcome the light. I remember being struck in Greek class when we were working on this passage. The word translated here as overcome, katalaben, unsurprisingly has several meanings. It can mean catch, attain, or overtake. But it can also mean comprehend or understand. I remember feeling a visceral response to this discovery. What if it is not that the darkness hasn't been able to overcome the light, to seize it, but rather that it hasn't been able to reach it or to understand it? And what if we, those who claim the label of Christian and who think we have a claim on Christ and are the ones who know what Jesus' message to the world was and is, what if we are included in that vastness that hasn't quite gotten to the light, that hasn't been able to fully understand? How might that change our relationship to the darkness? Not a wilderness to conquer, but a liminal space on the margins, perhaps afraid or unsure about getting too close to this mysterious or perhaps painfully bright light. How does that inform our role as Christians in relation to the Word made flesh, who is the only one able to make the living but unseeable God, the great is, was, will be, fully known to us? I'd like to close with a story I learned about in the past year that has resurfaced several times for me since I first heard it. Appropriately, it comes from the Jewish mystical Kabbalistic tradition. It is referred to as tzimtzum, a Hebrew word meaning contraction. In the beginning, God was everything and filled all of the space that was. In order to go about creation, God had to create space for that which was not God. So, before the creative process could begin, what is described as the in the beginning of both John and Genesis, God had to undergo a self-contraction or self-emptying of space. Creation, according to this story, begins with a sacrificial act on the part of God in order to birth the universe as we know it. This self-emptying makes me think of the life of Jesus and the sacrifices he made to point us to a better, more deeply connected, and more just world. But it also makes me think of God's humble vision to be born as a tiny, fragile, newborn human baby, in the humblest of settings, in the midst of hay and domesticated animals, in a world unwilling to make room. Once again, God breaks the rules, does not give up on humanity despite our stubbornness or our inability to see or understand the light. And once again, God makes room for creation. Perhaps that is the darkness in which the divine light is shining. The darkness that does not overcome, reach, or understand the light. Perhaps the darkness is the possibilities left open to us by God, out of God's deep and unwavering love for us. What we choose to do with that darkness, the space, the possibility, is up to us. So at the beginning of this new Gregorian calendar year, I invite us all to consider or reconsider these beginnings of Genesis, of John, of the Christmas story and the Incarnation, and of 2020. What do you want to make of this new year? My hope and prayer is that it can be a year filled with grace upon grace, and that you can peer out into the darkness and see not danger or despair, but hope and possibility. May we, like John the Baptist, be able to witness and testify to the true light of the world. May we work to be the hands and feet of Jesus, the Word made flesh, whose miraculous birth into this world we continue to celebrate this Christmas tide. And may we be a means of sharing that light with everyone we encounter. Amen.